Hello, everyone. Happy Disability Pride Month. My name is Nico Meyering. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white man with blonde hair, large black glasses, and a floral print shirt seated in front of a purple background. I have with me today my friend Jessica. Jessica, go ahead and describe yourself, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Lopez and I am a young woman wearing a green shirt with little metal decals, and I have medium length brown hair, and behind me just a blurred background of like a white terrace behind me. And I'm excited to be here and get to know you a little bit and share a little bit about my story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Jessica, what does disability pride mean to you?
That's such a hard question to answer because it means so many different things. I think to me, it means really celebrating disabled people, celebrating the culture that we have. I think there's 1.5 billion disabled people, and that's a large population. But I think it also is about like celebrating the people who are in that population and all of the things that they're doing and the innovation that they're creating. When you live with disability, you kind of have to learn how to be creative and learn how to think outside the box and live within the world that's not built for you. And that really means that you have to think about how you live and how the world lives and kind of rework how you do things. And that also leads to a lot of innovations, new inventions, new ways of doing things. And I think disability pride is about recognizing the people who are doing those things, even if you're not like a billionaire or creating like really popular things. It's still about your everyday life and the things that you're dealing with, whether good and bad, and also just being proud of who you are and what led you to become who you are, and just the atmosphere that has created you to be who you are. And I think it's really important to celebrate that in a world that just doesn't see us as people to celebrate exactly. And disability is still seen as shameful for a lot of people. And disability pride is kind of about reworking that narrative in a better light and seeing disabled people with more nuance.
I love everything that you said, Jessica. I love that you mentioned how disability life necessarily requires creativity and innovation. And also it requires, or rather that part of Disability Pride Month is learning to take pride in our culture and our experiences, learning to be self-assured and have that self-confidence, because the world is not a place that builds disabled people up all the time, unfortunately. Well,
Absolutely, and I think it's really important to emphasize that not only for the world but for ourselves, because we can often feel put down by the world and just the messages that we receive, not only outwardly but also like subconsciously. There are so many messages that are really anti-disability and that are really ableist that we don't realize the depth of how many messages that we receive that really can impact us in really bad ways. But and I also think that disability pride is also recognizing the bad things about disability and acknowledging that it definitely, you don't have to be proud about your disability. I live with chronic illness, and it really disturbed my life, and I acknowledge that. But I can also celebrate the way that it shaped me and made me a stronger person as well.
yes, absolutely. It's also an acknowledgement of the fact that almost everything can be seen through a disability lens. 1 in 4 US adults are disabled. So 25% of the population means that every issue is a disability issue.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings me to my second question. What is one thing you want non-disabled people to know about disability life?
There's so many things I want non-disabled people to know about disabled people. I think the main thing is recognizing the fact that disabled people don't have a lot of visibility in the world. They don't have a lot of representation, and they also don't have a lot of acknowledgement of the struggles that we face, that the world um, puts into our lives and kind of throws at us. And ableism is a thing that's not really recognized. And just the fact that non-disabled people still aren't willing to really listen to us and listen to what we have to say and kind of like put it on an equal pedestal with other populations. And I think non-disabled people really would do well, not only for disabled people, but for themselves to start really elevating us and amplifying who we are, our voices, and kind of stop trying to speak over us, but amplify us instead of, injecting their own viewpoints into our lives. And I think disabled people, we all have different views. There's 1.5 billion people have completely different views about how the world is, how the world works, and their own disabilities. And I also think that non-disabled people can recognize and acknowledge all of those different viewpoints and kind of bring them all together into a way of seeing the world that helps everyone. Because when you amplify disabled people, it benefits non-disabled people too. That's known as the curb cut effect, where when you accommodate disabled people, you're accommodating everybody else because everybody benefits from it. And one of the examples I actually give that people don't think about is previously, just a decade ago, disabled people who have back problems would have to request accommodations for sit-stand desks where you can stand while you're working at your desk. That was a struggle to get those accommodations. And then it came to a point where non-disabled people saw the value of this, even if they're not disabled. And it became this thing in the workforce where it's actually healthy to have a sit-stand desk and you can stand while you're working and you can sit while you're working too. And something that benefited disabled people ended up benefiting so many other people. And I think the goal for, at least for my disability advocacy, is to get people to see how even when you're supporting disabled people, you're supporting yourself in ways that you probably won't be able to see until you actually start making the movement to do that.
That's so wonderful, Jessica. And you're right. A lot of accessibility tools and accessibility features didn't get widespread acceptance until able-bodied people realized that they also benefited. So it's a bit, a bit of a bittersweet feeling there, at least for me. As you point out, disability has no one universal perspective or culture or anything like that. And I also like what you said about elevating disabled voices. That's kind of one of my goals here with this video series, because, when you get invited to the table, why wouldn't you automatically make more space or make more seats for others, right? So there is that. What are some lessons that being disabled has taught you?
There are so many lessons for me. I was born without hands and feet, so there is my perspective of disability is from someone who was born with it versus someone who developed a disability, and those are completely different viewpoints and dynamics around that. But I also developed a chronic illness at the age of 10 that really held me back, and it's not related to my physical disability. So I live with visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. And there's so many things that it taught me. I think the main thing that I've seen in my life is that people can assume that things are the way they appear. And for me, things are not the way they appear. You can look at me and you can think, well, maybe she's struggling to accomplish that task because it looks like she's struggling with it, but in reality, I'm not. Or people can assume things like, well, she lives with a disability, she must live with depression, she must be depressed because she doesn't have hands and feet, because I would be. And the reality is that's not the case. I'm someone who is happy with how I was born and who I am. And I think that taught me a lot about kind of making sure to center someone else's perspective before I assume things about them, or assume that I would do things differently, or assume how I would feel if I was in their position. Because the only person who can truly know how they feel about anything is that person. And that assumption of like putting my own feelings into their perspectives can really harm them. I know in my experience, there's been a lot of assumptions that have really held me back from being heard by people who just see things one way and then they just don't have the capacity or aren't willing to kind of listen to what I have to say and then kind of change how they see what they're thinking about. And for me, I think it's really important that I also kind of share my story and hopefully meet people who are willing to listen and learn how they can accommodate and support me, even if they can't actually change my life or my situation. They can still do things, little things to support me. For example, believing me and accepting what I have to say and accepting my ideas about how we can change the world and make things more accessible for disabled people. And that's kind of my goal, is to make sure that I'm not just focusing on my disability, but I'm also focusing on how other people um, can do things and how they need the world to be, what accommodations they need to really be successful, and also amplifying those disabilities and those accommodations as well as my own.
One thing that you said at the beginning of this response really stuck out to me, and that was your emphasis on, being believed as a disabled person is empowering. And it's empowering because it's not something that we can always rely upon. It is wild, right, that people would think that just because I'm disabled or you're disabled, that we are somehow not the best experts at what our life is like or what our bodies need. That's, I don't know, it's real weird, man.
It is.
Because the honest truth is that we are the only people that have to live in our bodies, and we are the only people that have to live our lives full time. So,
and we're also the only people who have to fit ourselves within the rest of the world systems. So we're constantly having to readjust ourselves to fit into a world that wasn't built for us. And that can lead to a lot of great perspective because you're seeing the world from the outside in. And when you're inside a system, that really can give you some blind spots, and disabled people can really see those blind spots and amplify them. And that's a really great benefit of having a disability.
Finally, for our time today, Jessica, what is one thing that you had to unlearn as a result of being disabled?
I think I had to unlearn my own ableist ideas.
Okay.
I think we all live with ableism. We all live with assumptions around other disabled people, just because there's so many different kinds of disabilities. There's so many worldviews that come with those disabilities. There's so many needs that other people have that I don't have, and a lot of times I just can't think of those needs because I don't have to live in whatever way that they have to live. And so for me, I really had to unlearn the fact that I can be ableist too, and disabled people can be ableist. And I had to kind of unlearn the viewpoint that disability is automatically a bad thing. And that's something I really emphasize, that disability isn't automatically a bad thing. People look at me and they look at the fact that I don't have hands and feet and they say, wow, you must have a really horrible life. Your life must be so hard. And I've always said, my life is not harder than anybody else's. It's just different. I do things in a different way. And that doesn't mean it's harder. It's just different. And I like to emphasize the fact that it's the same way for other people. The only person who can really decide whether their life is harder or their disability is a negative thing is that person. But I think for me, it was important for me to unlearn that conception that the disability must be hard. So now I approach people from a different perspective of their life is no harder or worse or different harder than mine. And when I approach people with that perspective, that really allows me to have an open mind about their own perspectives. And that also has helped me kind of remove the ableist perception that disability is just something that we need to erase and get rid of. when you have that perception that disability is something that needs to be erased, then a lot of times you're erasing disabled people as a whole. It leads to eugenics. It leads to discrimination. It leads to so many bad things that have historically been the case for since humanity has existed. But when you start to reframe disability as a neutral thing, then it's starting to open up the world of disability pride and disability rights, and you start to see how disabled people's voices can be heard and seen in a much better light than it has been in the media and historically.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessica. Jessica, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, I mainly live on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm also kind of diving into Twitter. So all of my social media platforms are at Real Jess L. So REAL And I like to kind of share my perspective around disability rights on all of those platforms, and also share my journey. For my journey, it's been quite a rocky road. Because of my chronic illness, I was denied an accessible education until COVID came into play. And now that I have online education as something that I can access, I'm thriving in my own world. I'm thriving in school, and I'm finally getting those opportunities that I've always dreamed of having. And I hope to kind of share that perspective with others and show people how we can provide more accessible workplaces, more accessible school, and also change the public policy that creates those systems so that we can make them more flexible for disabled people. So you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, sharing about all of those things.
Fantastic. I've loved seeing your journey on social media. You're someone who is triple majoring. You're someone who is involved in student government. You're someone who has like this really cool tech internship. I can't wait to see what you do next, my friend.
Thank you. And I actually I have been invited to speak at an online education conference in August.
Really?
And it'll be my first like actually official public speaking event, and there'll be 800 attendees at this conference. So it's gonna be really exciting to be able to share my story there as well.
Congratulations. I didn't know that.
Thank you. I haven't shared it yet.
Ah,
Well,
okay, okay.
your
So it's new.
viewers will be the first person to see that.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to make the space for myself and my story and my views.
Of course.